But it's good to connect with all of you again. So thank you very much. And thank you, Sharadia, for the introduction. So what I thought we would do is briefly begin by just recapping some of the key ideas from our previous sessions, because I know that some people may be new, but to be honest, even if people are not new, it doesn't actually matter, because there's a great value in repetition. There's a great value in looking at certain key ideas and reviewing them again, just to get a real sense of what they are, because sometimes when we hear something more than once, it helps it to go between the barrier of our conscious mind and our unconscious mind. So I thought we'd begin that way. And then after that, I'm really open to all the questions, comments, anything that you would like to ask, so we can personalize the understanding to your needs and for your application as well. Okay, so let's just go through some of the slides and some of the key ideas. And Mother Sharadia was making a very good point that you could actually do like a whole, it could be 10-part seminar or 5 parts, but we want to give you a few key things to take away and think about. And I guess the best way to think about this is like a menu. What has struck me in the last 25 years is the extraordinary depth, profundity, and accuracy of the Vedic knowledge. So whether it's the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, these books contain a very deep and profound narrative on the human condition. Before, when I was 13, I used to read about, from the age of 13, I would read about books on psychology, philosophy, and so on. And there were some interesting ideas, some good ideas. We should give credit where credit's due. But what I found was often it was a mixture. You had something where the person had accurately latched onto a truth, but it was also mixed with many speculations, sometimes their own misperceptions, sometimes their own ideas or attachments. And so what would happen is, because there's a natural translation, when you're given something which is a half truth, it's half the impact. Because what happens is you apply it and it works partly, but then also it creates other issues. What I found extraordinary about the Vedic knowledge is that it's 100% accurate if it's understood properly. Now, let's be very clear. Sometimes it's not understood properly. It does take a bit of expertise to understand things in the right way. But properly understood, it is phenomenal. And therefore, it is profoundly effective. So what we're trying to share with you is some of those ideas. Okay, let's get into it. So we did a review. See, most goal-setting seminars, they work in what we call the mode of passion. So they don't really take into account the reality of someone's situation. They work on the basis that we don't even look at that. What are you attached to, right? So you saw an advert, so you want to buy a particular product. Okay, but let's put that into your goals. What we tried to offer you was something which is of a higher standard than the seminars and the courses that you can buy in the marketplace. So taking it to a higher level, the first thing we asked you to do in our first seminar on this topic was to do a reflection exercise on 2020. And we were explaining the point that life has a language, and there are lessons that life is trying to teach each and every one of us. In the Vedic knowledge, it says that we all come in with different types of karma, so different types of actions and reactions, experiences that we will have, and different types of personality. So we began by trying to ground our consideration in reality. So what did you do well in 2020? Or your foundations, what allowed you to draw strength, what allowed you to be stable, what allowed you to deal with the unexpected. There's always a trade-off. In life, it's never that everything is expected, right? Some things are, though. There are many things which stay the same. And there are many things which change. And so the success in life is being able to have enough stability to deal with the inevitable instability. And within our Vedic knowledge, Bhakti Yoga tradition, it is said that the real stability comes when we build the internal stability that is a result of our spiritual practice and our connection with the Supreme. The more that we're connected, it is like being in the water, but you've got a strong rope that's tying you to the ship. So it doesn't matter how rough the waters are, you know that you can't be dragged away ultimately because you're connected and you're grounded on something far more solid than the external environment. We asked you to consider, what did you learn about yourself in your life? And what were the main challenges? And on the basis of all that consideration, to then use that to inform your focus for 2021. So that was one of the things that we focused on in the first session. We talked about what we call the 3 modes of material nature, which is a key concept in the Bhagavad Gita, but it's also present in other Vedic literatures. And we asked you to do what we called the modes audit. Again, we started by doing an analysis so that when we get to the goal setting, we're informed, right? It's based upon reality. It's based upon a clear scan of my current situation, so I can use that to understand what do I need to be focusing on going forward. So we described the 3 modes, which are described by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, especially in the 14th chapter, and how there are some things which are in the mode of ignorance. So characterized by, let's say, lack of cleanliness, inertia, ignorance, lack of knowledge, etc. We explained that there are some things which are characterized by passion, intense greed, longing, lust, right? So a very strong desire to stimulate the senses, to enjoy the senses, very much based upon a self-focus, a self-centered focus. And we explained how there are things which are based on, or which are in the category of the mode of goodness. So when we serve selflessly in knowledge, when we act in a balanced way, when we can see things clearly, those kinds of qualities or characteristics are the mode of goodness. So we ask you to think about different areas of life: health, for example, career, relationships. We asked you to, finances, there are many. We asked you to look at each area and give it a gradation. Is this area in my life in the mode of ignorance, or in the mode of passion, or in the mode of goodness? And we also talked about how each of these modes have an outcome. A very wonderful statement is made by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, activities in the mode of passion begin like nectar and end like poison. So the idea is that each mode turns out a certain way. Ignorance is bad in the beginning and just goes on being bad. So it leads to destructive outcomes. Passion, which is the really, what's the word I'm looking for, is a really dangerous one. Passion is dangerous because it looks good in the beginning. It looks nice, but in the long term, it becomes negative. And goodness, also very interesting. Krishna says to Arjuna, it begins like poison. It's hard in the beginning. You have to do work for it. It's just like you want to study. You're going to be in the university potentially 3 to 4 years, right? You're not earning any money. In fact, you're in debt. You're working hard, but for the initial challenges and investment, what you can gain over the longer term is much greater. So again, we asked you to look at different areas of your life, work out which mode they were in, so you could understand, okay, if it's in ignorance, that's going down. So I need to adjust that area. If it's in passion, it looks up in the beginning, but I need to ideally keep an eye on that and try and move it, because if it's in goodness, that's ideal. In goodness, you set something up, so it's going to continually work positively for you. A very simple example, you want to save. We explained that most people, well, not most people, hopefully, Many people, when the pandemic hit, they were knocked out because there was no arrangement for emergencies. So, literally the money was coming in, the money was going out, money was coming in, money was going out. And in some cases, more money was going out than was coming in. But we explained that in goodness, for example, someone may think, you know what, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, next month. I've got a job, money's coming in. Let me set up a system so that automatically a small amount of that money is automatically being saved. So that whatever happens, I'm not caught completely off guard with absolutely no support financially, for example. So we were talking about some of these examples and asking you to evaluate different areas of your life. And these are all things you can continue to do. So we also did a visualization exercise. We took you to December 31st, 2021. And from that vantage point, we asked you, okay, it's December the 31st. You're so happy. You feel you're there. You're looking at yourself in the mirror and you're thinking, that was an amazing year. That was an amazing 2021. And in the visualization exercise, and you can get the recordings on the Bhakti Yoga London Facebook page, if you want to go through those again, we asked you from that vantage point to think, this has been a great year. December 31st, 2021. 2021 has been a fantastic year. And we asked you to allow yourself, through the visualization, to simply ask yourself one question. Why? Why was it a great year? And to allow your mind to bring up for your own awareness what caused that year to be a great year, and to use that again to inform your goals. This was based upon a very simple concept. Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita that the mind can be the best friend or the worst enemy. One of the reasons why for many of us, our mind is an enemy is because we don't understand our mind. And interestingly enough, we're not very conscious of the mind. A lot of what goes on in our life is driven unconsciously. But this exercise was really using that unconscious faculty that normally just pulls us in a certain direction that we don't want to go. We now switched the process. We said, now you take control of your unconscious faculty by allowing it to give you insight and to give you realization about some of the desires that may be there, which we may not be so consciously aware of. So that was the inner lab. And it was also based upon this hierarchy which Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita. And again, it is such a deep, profound, and powerful literature for a number of reasons. This is just one. This is just one. So Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, he's explaining that higher than the senses is the mind, higher than the mind is the intelligence, higher than the intelligence is the soul. Now, normally when people read literature, especially philosophical, spiritual literature, they like it, they gain something from it, but they don't understand how practical it is. There's often a mind-body duality in Western psychology and Western philosophy, which lends itself to the idea that, yes, you have philosophy, that's nice, it's interesting, and then you've got the practical world. The Vedic teaching is different. If it's understood properly, then the philosophy allows you to apply it in the real world to extraordinary effect. And so here we have this model. We have the environment around us, and the environment around us, we see different objects, we have different experiences which stimulate the senses, which then leads an impression on the mind, right? So you see an advert, you notice the advert, you notice a particular radio song, you've heard it, and now it's leaving an impression on the mind. Maybe you guys are too young for this, but I remember many years ago, there was one song which I just found very annoying, right? It was a soundtrack for a movie, and it was the first in the series of movies for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And it was just annoying because I'd hear the song on the radio and I could not get that song out of my head. I tried really hard, but it just would not leave me, right? So this is an example. The radio's in the environment, you hear the song through the senses, it leaves an impression on the mind. Now, for most people, the intelligence isn't spiritually strong. It's not backed up by wisdom. So then the mind is now conditioned by something that's come through the senses, and the mind bullies the intelligence and says to the intelligence, I want that. You need to work out a plan to get me something that I want. So what we were saying is that many people do not have so much access to their free will. They're a slave of their senses, which is a slave to the environment. However, in Krishna, or with the Bhakti Yoga tradition, the Krishna conscious tradition, when we spiritualize the intelligence by having discussions like the ones that we're having, by connecting with spiritual literature like the Bhagavad Gita, you activate and you strengthen the intelligence. So now what happens is the mind will tell the intelligence, I want something. But the intelligence is going to say to the mind, are you sure? We could buy that. But if we buy that, it's going to cost so much money and it may not give you the real enjoyment that you're looking for. So maybe we should do something else with that money. Maybe there's a better way to spend our time, our money, our energy. So therefore, what literally happens is the soul starts to gain more dominance. In other words, the deeper, the higher self becomes stronger. And therefore, over time, you tend to make more powerful decisions and choices, which lead to a much more profound, deep, and lasting happiness. So this was a model. Now, one implication of this was around the environment. And it was around the idea that if you want to achieve goals, we should also use the environment to support us. So we talked about systems theory. Systems theory is the idea that whatever you want to do in life, you shouldn't just rely on your willpower, which is what most people do in goal setting. I'm going to do it. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to go to the gym. They just rely on their willpower. So if we know that the environment is powerful, what we try to do is set up the environment to push you in the direction of meaningful goals. How do we do this? A very simple example. You want to do well in your studies. You know it's easy to get distracted. It's hard to just focus when you're by yourself. So what do? You decide that you're going to have a study group. You get some of the most focused and studious friends in your year at university, and you have a recurring appointment in the diary where you're all going to meet at the library between this time and this time to study together. And what does that do? It creates an environment that supports you in your outcome. Willpower tends to be limited. Now it's interesting. This is found by research. What they don't know, because they don't necessarily have this Vedic understanding, is that the higher the mode, the stronger the willpower. Krishna alludes to this in the Bhagavad Gita, right? He talks about Dridhavrata, firm vow, firm determination, right? And he also explains that in the mode of goodness, there is this firm, strong determination. So it's not exactly that willpower is static, which is what most research or researchers tend to assume. However, if you have a higher consciousness, which gives you stronger willpower, plus an environment that helps you to achieve your goal, then it's optimum. So systems theory is saying, whatever you want to achieve, ask yourself one simple question. What kind of environment would automatically help me by pushing me in the direction that I want to go in? And I'll just add here, because we always want to add maximum value. Environment also means people. What type of association is most supportive of the direction that I would like to move in? Many people miss that. In fact, many people, they fail to achieve their goals because they have a goal that is pointing in one direction and they associate with people who are pointing in the opposite direction. So even if they can achieve their goal, now it's 100 times more effort. You're trying not to drink, and you hang out with all your friends in the pub who drink, right? So they don't even like the fact that you're trying. They're looking at you like, oh, you're the odd one out, party pooper, why aren't you drinking? You think you're better than us, don't you? So now you've made your job 100 times harder. So let us use the willpower and the environment to drive the behavior by creating the correct system. Okay, let's move on. We also talked about the quality of our goals and why people go for something. We quoted the Bhagavad Gita, one who is situated equally well in praise and blame. Right? Very interesting statement. Most people, the goals that they have are based upon an insecurity. I want to be validated by people. I want people to like me. If I get this job, then my friends will think that I'm really successful, right? And we gave the example that people want to, quote, be somebody, which is a very sad statement in a sense, because what's implied is you're nobody now, right? You're nobody. You really actually believe that you're nobody. And you think that when you get that particular status symbol, then you'll suddenly become worthwhile. And we were just making the point that that is not a healthy position to be in. Because what's interesting is when you achieve that goal, you're going to find that someone's got more than you have. And then you'll think, okay, I'm somebody relative to people who've got less success than I have. But I'm still inferior to people who've got more success than I have. And so the treadmill just begins again. There is another way. In the Gita, it says samadarshana. There's someone who's wise, sees with equal vision. That means that they see the equal value of each and every person independent of what they have or don't have. And that's a very strong position to be in. That your drive is not for validation. When it's clean. Okay, I want to achieve a particular outcome, but if I don't achieve it, I don't become inferior due to failure. But to have that mentality that I'm not inferior due to failure, we have to let go of the misconception that I become more valuable due to external arrangements. So this was the idea here. We also pointed out that when people are too attached or too dependent on an external outcome, or they're too fearful of failure, this is the root cause of procrastination. Very, very interesting. There's increasing interest in the world around certain philosophies which emphasize detachment, right? And I'm just going to pause before I carry on this. I want to see everyone on the screen. How many of you have come across that on the internet or books? If you have, just raise your electronic hand. If you come across certain philosophies around being detached, doing the difference, doing your best that you can, but not being dependent upon the outcomes. Has anyone ever come across, okay, there's a big movement in the world now around what they call stoicism, where people are constantly talking about this idea that I'm not dependent. I do my best, but I'm not dependent. And it's an interesting reaction to previous periods where it was just all about you have to achieve X, Y, or Z in order to, quote unquote, as we said, be somebody. So this understanding is based upon this fact. It's based upon the fact that actually lasting and consistent achievement is enhanced by having a value system that does not, let's show you this slide, that does not fall into the trap of thinking that I am my achievement. So we strive for goals, and that's important. As human beings, one of the ways that we can trigger positive emotions is through moving towards meaningful outcomes. So goal setting is important for that reason, but we don't want to identify our self-worth with outcomes. That's the point. Our self-worth should not be dependent upon certain external outcomes. So I think that's the key point we brought up there. And maybe this is the last slide before we go to your questions. So we gave you some key ideas. So one is to have informed goals. Two is to make them smart, simply meaning specific, motivating, stuff that you really think, this is something I could get out of bed for, right? A stands for attainable, having goals which are realistic. Now, your long-term goal could be very amazing, but the steps should be realistic, right? So attainable, okay? So I can break it down. I can do this step. Then after that, I can do the next step. The R stands for relevant. So something that's building upon who you are and where your life is at the moment. And the C stands for trackable. So you're able to review once a month. I encourage you to put something in your diary once a month or once every 2 weeks. You're looking, how am I doing against these goals? How are things going? It's amazing how successful people can become just by having a regular review. We talked about having a key understanding of why. People miss this step. They go for something, but they don't know why they're doing it. If the motivation is weak, the determination is also weak. If the motivation is strong, your determination also becomes strong. So we suggested write down, why am I doing this? So when you feel like skipping something, you can remind yourself, no, I remember why I was doing this. I know why I'm moving in this direction. And that can give you more fuel to keep going. We talked about having a sense of what you gain by doing what you're trying to do. So if I achieve this goal, how does it enhance my life? What does it bring into my life that I would not otherwise have? What's your support system? So making yourself accountable to other people, having people that you can bounce ideas off or share how your plans are going with. That helps to keep things on track. And all of these are just some of the ways in which we can really move in a powerful way towards real, meaningful, effective goal setting. And we encourage you, in your goal setting, include spiritual goals. So it could be spiritual practices, mantra meditation, etc. It could be regularly attending the Bhakti Yoga London program so you can hear the higher wisdom, reflect and ask questions. It could be reading spiritual literature such as the Bhagavad Gita as it is, but keeping that dimension in your life so that you don't just move forward externally, but we also move forward internally. Okay, so these were some key ideas. And on that, we're going to stop and we're going to open up for your questions.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, thank you very much for that very clear and concise review. I just want to ask everyone that they could kindly send me their questions directly to this account. I was logged in on with another account, but I have disconnected. So if anyone has sent questions, I might have lost them. But for now, I do have a couple of questions ready. The first one is, if you could elaborate on explaining what would the difference be between goals which have been set in the mode of passion or motivated by the mode of passion and goals set and motivated by the mode of goodness.
Okay, so let's put this in a very simple way. One of the key differences between passion and goodness is knowledge. In goodness, there's activity. In passion, there's overactivity. In goodness, there's balance. In passion, there's a lack of balance, there's imbalance. Goals which are set in the mode of goodness are informed by knowledge. They're informed by a deep understanding of who you are and a deep understanding of your situation, right? So they tend to be more an outgrowth of an understanding, who am I, right? Because this is really key, and I'm glad this question came up. In many cases, if we don't have a deep sense of who we are, we will lack a deep sense of what will make us happy, right? Very, very simple point. So I remember, I knew one person. I mean, she's really wonderful, actually, really wonderful person. But she was reflecting on how, when she was at university, when she was in her late teens, she didn't know herself. She didn't know what made her tick. So then what did she do? She set herself a goal. I want to go to university. She applied for the wrong course, right? Has anyone ever known friends who went to study something and then later on regretted what they studied? If you have, raise your hands. Give me a sign. Yeah, I think many, and this is interesting. It's simple but very profound, and I'm really glad, because we really love to serve people. We want to offer you the best quality that we can. Let's think this through. So you have someone who doesn't know themselves very well. Therefore, their choices are not so informed. So she went on to study a subject that actually it wasn't the best subject for her. She didn't have such, let's say, such real interest or capability in that subject, okay? But now she'd become locked into that study. So what happened is it was a lot more work to do well in that course. You see, when you do something that you naturally have a great interest in, you just love it. I mean, it's a kind of subject you would be learning it even if it wasn't your degree, because you're just so into it, right? Then it doesn't become work. It's actually just a joy, you see? So she didn't know herself so well, so she applied to do a subject that really wasn't the optimal subject. Had she really known herself so well, she would have studied something different, and she would have got a higher grade with less effort, because she would be playing to her nature, right? Now, let's take it a step further. So she studied something without necessarily understanding herself so much and what would resonate with her. Now, as a result of that study, she was locked into a particular profession that she hadn't also explored and she didn't have a deep understanding of the day-to-day reality of that particular job. So I've locked myself into a study that doesn't really fit my nature and interests and motivations. Now, having invested 3 or 4 years or even longer, I'm now going to go into the job that relates to that study. And so, because I don't know that profession and the realities of day-to-day work in that profession, now I'm trapped in that profession. So you see how that mode of passion plays out. It looks good in the beginning. I've chosen something, I'm getting into university, et cetera, et cetera. But in the long term, it locks one into, or it pulls one towards certain outcomes which are not necessarily optimal. You see? So that's passion. It's activity or overactivity that is not sufficiently well informed. And another example that we're all experiencing is the global climate consideration, right? The global earth consideration. Because oftentimes as a humanity, we've made many choices which are wonderful in the short term, but which are causing all kinds of damage to the environment. And this has been going on for a long time. And we're now, if we haven't approached it yet, although I'd say we're there already, we're in a crisis. Now, the Vedas are so powerful because if people had spiritual understanding, that could have been avoided. It would be understood early that if you do these activities, all they will do is work out the way that humanity is acting. Is this an ignorance or passion or goodness, right? It's active, true, right? So it's not ignorance, it's active, but it's overactive, overconsumption, without having a real sense of stewardship and balance. That's passion. So we know that passion, it goes up. In the short term, we've got all these goods, products, and so on, but no one's noticing we're destroying all these species. The earth is actually becoming warmer. We're having all of these negative environmental disasters. And if we carry on, we're going to be in serious trouble. One study has found that at the current rate of consumption, we would need to have at least 8 planets to keep up to the amount of consumption that people are trying to have. Eight planets. So this is how you differentiate. Goodness is informed activity, which is done with a sense of balance and with a sense of healthy give and take also. It's not just me, I want. There's a recognition that we will take something, but we should also restore or replenish as we're doing that. And that creates a sustainable situation. I often try to explain the mode of goodness like a good friendship. A bad friendship, you're around someone and they're selfish. Every time you meet them, it's all about them. They just want to take from you. And after a while, you know that relationship's going to fall apart because you're going to be like, dude, all you do is take. I don't want to spend time with you anymore. Passion. What's goodness? Goodness is we're friends. When we meet, I really care about you. I want to hear about how your life is going. I want to rejoice in your successes. And when you're struggling, I want to be there to support you. And you do the same for me. Right? Now, when you meet someone and you have a friend who's like that, when you're happy, they're even happier that you're successful. Right? And when you're struggling, they want to be there to support you. When you have friendships like that, you don't walk away from those friendships. Why? Because the nature of the friendship is balanced. Therefore, it's sustainable. There's give and take. You're giving energy to them. You're taking energy as well, right? But because you're giving energy and they're giving energy, it's sustainable. If you're giving and giving and giving and they don't give anything back, after a while you think, you know what? I'm not getting anything from this relationship. People leave, they check out. So that can help to clarify the difference.
Thank you, Prabhu, for that very clear explanation. It reminded me of the idea that we really need to make our mind our friend so that we can have that mode of goodness relationship with ourselves. Now, you mentioned earlier that, we need to use our intelligence, to set our goals because, the senses from the environment, the senses will get so many inputs and then the senses can drag us in so many directions and, make us think that we want certain things which are not actually, really beneficial or in line with who we really are. But now the question that I have is that I really feel that in our current day and age, it's almost like our intelligence is being hijacked because, we think about a society as like Nazi Germany as being one that was filled with propaganda. But I feel like the level of propaganda that we are, facing on a daily basis is much greater. And it's been coming since we were so small. So how do we reclaim our intelligence and how do we ensure that we stay in control of our intelligence so that we can set the goals which are in line with our nature and will actually serve us in the long term?
Thank you for a very, very intelligent question. The pursuit of higher knowledge has a prophylactic quality. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Prophylactic means it's protective. Just like, people will try to protect themselves from certain diseases or illnesses. Spiritual knowledge, it protects you because by stimulating the intelligence, it gives you more ability to have discernment and to evaluate things more deeply. It is a journey because you can always have more of that. But just that factor means that when the adverts are there in the environment, you can look at the advert critically And you can think, is that something I really want? Is that something that's going to actually be beneficial to me? Or is it something that I don't want? And let's be clear, it's interesting. Many people are moving in this direction. I was explaining to some people that I'm giving some guidance to. We were looking at this idea of technology. There's an interest, there's not one study, there's many studies. What they're finding is technology has definitely some key applications if it's balanced. What they're finding is if it's not balanced, and if you want to know more about this, there's a speaker called Carl Newport. He's written a book called Deep Work, and he's written another book. He's done a talk called Digital Minimalism. And he outlines very clearly the research and the effects of an over dependence on technology. Now, taking it from the lens of the Bhagavad Gita, because the Bhagavad Gita has many verses which talk about duality, right? So honor and dishonor, etc. So I did some analysis based upon the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. And then I discovered something which I then got confirmed by looking at the system of medicine which relates to the Vedas, which is called Ayurveda. So the first question I thought, okay, Bhagavad Gita talks about duality. So if we're looking at this idea of technology, we're talking about basically automation, artificial technology, mechanisms, and so on. So what's the other side of that? The other side of that, naturally, is the natural world. So what it taught me is that if we want to balance our connection with technology, we need to develop a healthier relationship with nature, more time in nature. A friend of mine, he's ex-military, and so he was telling me that the military have done studies, and they use this in their training of soldiers, generals, that one of the things which helps to reset the body and the mind and to help to balance the effect of technology, screens, is to spend time in nature. When you spend time in nature regularly, it also resets the physical body. It minimizes stress. It can lower levels of anxiety. It can help to overcome or reset senses of depression. It's interesting, in the Vedas, the earth is considered to be one of the 7 mothers, Mother Bhumi. So when you spend time in nature, you're actually gaining that nurturing energy. I was in Germany last year. I think it was around mid towards end of last year. And I was speaking to one therapist. She's a very, very powerful lady. And she was telling me that when you spend time with your technology all the time, the technology emits a radiation. And what it does is it affects your biomagnetic field. Every living entity, whether it's a plant, an animal, or a human, have a biomagnetic field around the body, which can be seen, actually. There's a certain type of technology called a Kirlian camera. It's a Kirlian photography. You can look this up online. It can take a picture of the biomagnetic field around a living organism. So she said that the technology, it disrupts that field. And she said one of the most important things that people should do, therefore, is spend regular time in nature. And going for a walk in the park is good. Even better is being physically in touch with nature, whether it's having your hand on the ground, right? You're going bare feet, whatever it is, because what that does is it restores the balance that's lost by being around nature all the time. So to your point, yes, there's a lot of propaganda, but the way to rebalance the artificial is like, imagine it being like, imagine there being 2 ends of a scale and you've got a needle that's between them. So the needle in modern society is heavily leaning towards the artificial. So what we need to do is consciously lean it back towards the natural. And that's what will balance up that sense of being overly stimulated by propaganda and so on and so forth. So spiritual knowledge automatically does that. And spiritual knowledge is what we call Shuddha Sattva. It's about really high, refined quality. So anything which is of the Shuddha Sattva, which means spiritual knowledge, Bhagavad Gita, etc., and those things which are in Sattva, which are in goodness, which is natural. So nature, balance, all of those things can help us to be free of being manipulated through advertising, propaganda, trends. You can make more of a conscious and informed decision about how you move forward.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. I think the essence of that is firstly to regulate our use of technology, because I think we live in a world where it's probably unavoidable, and many of us, have to use it for our work and currently just to connect with others. And then secondly, it's just so important to balance it as well, of spending quality time in a natural state and really connecting with nature. Now, a follow-up question on that.
Just on that is that also natural means the natural cycles. So the time that we go to sleep, the time that we wake up, they help to actually balance us even psychologically. So my wife studied medicine, and she was telling me about this, what they call it, circadian rhythms. So if you actually have a balance in terms of the time and so on, it actually also grounds you more psychologically and mentally. They've also found that when, to your point, Sharadia, when people are too connected to technology, and Carl Newport speaks about this extensively, and the research is overwhelming, it's linked to higher levels of anxiety. Because in Ayurveda, when you see computer screens all the time, it increases what they call vata. Vata is a certain energy, which is really like a more ethereal energy. Now, in balance, it's okay, but when we see technology and are involved in technology all the time, what it does is it creates too much of that vata, which predisposes one to being less grounded, to have highest likelihood for anxiety, more likelihood for depression as well. And if you do some research, there's so many studies on this, it's ridiculous. It's just that it's not mainstream, but there's literally thousands of pages of internet information, and there's books on the same thing. I've done the research, and I'll be talking more about that maybe in some Instagram sessions in the future, just because it's so unfortunate that people don't have access or awareness of this knowledge, which can make such a big and powerful difference. Because what happens is they don't see the connection between their lifestyle and their mental state. It's not understood that there's a connection. So therefore, some of the things that people are suffering, they don't realize that there's certain things that they're doing, and that's playing into some of the difficulties they're having mentally in terms of depression, anxiety, not being grounded, etc.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, it's really important that we, I think, optimize connecting ourselves with the rhythm of nature on a daily basis and also on a yearly basis. So because I work in the field of education, I'm always interested in especially teenagers, and I've read several articles that say that research does prove that the more time teenagers spend on social media, the more their anxiety and their depression and actually suicidal tendencies increases. And obviously teenagers might be more vulnerable than we are, but I think we should still take note of that. But then related to that, in education, it's been a global movement for a couple of years now, at least a decade, to have a focus on what we call outcomes-based education. And in essence, outcomes-based education really instills that idea in your mind that your value is equated, to the outcomes that you can produce. And I think, we've seen that education system in most of the Western world, and I'm pretty sure that that has, an effect on our subconscious mind and the way we see ourselves. So now my question is, when we have this like subconscious programming, and we see that when we achieve a goal, we feel, very excited or very satisfied, is that indicating that we are placing, too much value in achieving our goals? And if that is the fact, how do we change that? How do we stop like identifying our value so much with our goals and our achievements? Because I do think that's the way we've been programmed for a long time.
Okay, thank you for that question. Achieving goals is not bad. Let's start there. Achieving goals can be very, very healthy and beneficial on the proviso that the goal does not define the person. And I'll explain what I mean. There's a simple litmus test we can do here. Inevitably, we will sometimes be successful in achieving outcomes, and sometimes we will be unsuccessful in achieving outcomes. The best thing we can do here is to watch what happens to you and watch what happens to your mentality and how you feel about yourself when you don't succeed. That's the thing to look for. Because if you're too dependent upon outcomes, then what will happen is when you don't achieve something, it will really you will really feel bad about yourself. And that's the sign that the balance is not there. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, it's good to associate with people who value us independent of the outcome. You see, that's one of the key things that we need to do. We want to be we want to become the association as well as to find the association whereby it's not that, oh, you've got money, okay, I'm going to pay attention to you, and something happened later on, you're not making so much money, I've got no time for you anymore. That's a real cause of insecurity in the modern world. And it's interestingly enough, no one's speaking about it so much now, but it's a cause of also of real insecurity in male-female relationships. Because then people are thinking, as long as I've got something external, this person's happy to be with me. If I don't have it, they're not going to have they'll have no willingness to spend any time with me whatsoever. So it causes a lot of insecurity. So we should look at it in that particular way. But I will also say that the ideology that you are valuable because of your outcomes, it's part of a wider problem in society. But the irony, and this is one of the reasons why I'm saying this as well, the irony is that people who have healthy self-esteem, they're more likely to achieve outcomes consistently anyway. That's the irony of it. People who have healthy self-esteem, they're not scared of failure. Why? Because their self-esteem is not invested in the outcome. So I do my best. If I achieve, fantastic. If I don't, we just learn from it and try again. And you can see people like that. They're very robust and psychologically resilient, and they're ready to try different things. Even in the business world right now, I've been discussing this with professionals over the last few weeks. Right now, big businesses, they're trying to create environments of psychological safety so that people will feel secure enough to try different things, because they understand that it's going to make them money if their team members are not scared to fail so that they can be innovative. So again, we see this underlying theme that the more that people's lifestyle, psychology, and approaches are aligned with this deeper understanding, you get more external outcomes as a side effect than by being attached to the external outcomes, which actually just fosters more insecurity.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. So it seems like one of the key things that we need to do is we need to create a culture where, for each other, we are valuing each other, regardless of the outcomes, valuing each other's internal inherent value. And then, with that culture, it will hopefully be internalized over time. Now, we have quite a couple of more questions.
One thing to that, though.
Yes, sorry.
Answer. It's valuing that person inherently, but it's also encouraging to do their best. It's not an excuse for being lazy. It's like, oh, we're not goal-oriented, so therefore we don't have to try our best. No. It's you're valuable, but we should also be doing our best, because in the Vedic culture, we do want goals, but not for ourselves. This is what it means. So it's not being attached to goals, right? But it's not being attached to not achieving outcomes, but it's achieving outcomes for a higher purpose. That's what we call service. I want to cook so that you can have a wonderful experience of a meal. It's not like, well, we don't care about results. So it doesn't matter how the meal turns out. It doesn't matter whether it's cooked or not, because we don't care about the results. No. If you have a son or daughter and you care about them, you do want that meal, but the meal is not for you. So there is a way of achieving and striving, but for a greater purpose.
Thank you for clarifying that. So here's there's two quick questions which I think you could maybe just briefly clarify. The one is that you mentioned that the fear of failure can often paralyze us and stop us from, even setting goals and then progressing towards goals. But in the like the self-help world, they also talk a lot about the fear of success.
Mm-hmm.
So could you elaborate how the fear of success could also create like a blockage for us to set and pursue goals?
So what happens in terms of fear of success is that sometimes a person envisions that if they become successful in achieving a particular outcome, there'll be some things that come along with the outcome that could be unpalatable, let's say. Now, to be honest, that fear of success is actually, in some ways, it can be useful. Not that it's good, but it can be useful if it's turned into an awareness of the full vision of our achievement. In other words, there's a book that my spiritual mentor wrote. One of the books in the series was called Spiritual Warrior 4. And in that book, there's a section called CEO Depression. So what he talks about, and there's some studies on this, is people who spent their whole life thinking that when I reach the top of my profession, I'll be happy. And they reach the top of their profession and they realize that it comes along with so many additional things that they hadn't even thought about and that they didn't want. You see? So fear of success isn't good in of itself, but we can take the essence of it, which is to understand what comes along with the territory, so that when I make a decision to go for something, I'm doing it with a full awareness of the price I'm also going to have to pay for that particular outcome. I heard some research. I heard this a few times, and what they found was, you had these, law firms, and they would hire these young ladies, and these ladies were super powerful, super efficient, super intelligent. I mean, they would make partner, after a few years, and the law firms were not able to keep those women. Right now, what they found, they did studies on this. So these young ladies, they would, and this has been found cross-culturally, intelligent, successful, especially cultured women, they tend to marry men who are slightly older than them, right? Slightly older in age because of the maturity aspect, who are as materially successful or more materially successful as those women, right? They tend to go for men who are slightly older and who are in the same kind of educational level, right? So similar level of intelligence, because they want to have a meaningful conversation with someone who can hold their conversation. So they go for men who are slightly older and who are in a similar level of intelligence or more intelligent, similar level of success or more successful. So that the men tend to be earning as much as those women or more. Now, she becomes partner. That means she's earning well. When she gets to the age of 30, many of these women, they're leaving the law firms and they can't keep them. Why? Because they realize that actually, I don't want to be working 70, 80 hours a week. I also want to have a family. I want to have good relationships. And my husband's earning as much as I'm earning, so we don't need the money. So why am I killing myself up at 6 a.m., coming back home at 9 p.m., and I hardly spend any time with my children when I don't even need the money and they want balance? And so it's in the study, it said that they're more intelligent than the men, because you've got some crazy guys who just spend all their time working, and the women are like, are you crazy? You spend all your time working, you never see your family, you don't spend any time with your partner. That's why she wants to divorce you, by the way. All that kind of stuff. So the key point here is to understand that sense of balance. So remind me, what was the question? Because I want to tie it back in with what you're saying, because I was just kind of slightly detoured there. But if you could just remind me, what was the point?
The question was, how can the fear of success also become a block in our goal setting?
So it's to understand that that balance is required. So if this vision of success, know what comes along with it and be conscious of what you're getting into. Otherwise, you go into something without really understanding what you're doing, and then you don't realize, yes, you can get this, but this comes along with all of these other things which we didn't take into account and which we don't want. So we can turn the fear of success on its head by turning it into a clear understanding of what we want and what comes along with it. So again, we can make an informed decision in that way.
Thank you so much, Robert. Now, someone is asking a related question, and they are saying, how can we build our confidence without depending on our outcomes? Because it can really, I suppose, knock your confidence if you've got goals, and it seems that you are not meeting your goals or failing to reach your goals.
So goal setting can be used to build confidence if it's done in a specific way. Okay, there's a few factors. First, the goal should be attainable. I think we touched upon this in the previous session. So someone sets an unrealistic goal and then they don't achieve it and they feel bad about themselves and they feel, oh, I feel bad. The issue was actually that the goal was wrong. It's not the goal setting was wrong, it's that you set the wrong goal. It was uninformed, right? So again, when we talked about the slides, SMART, specific, motivating, attainable, right? So I set myself up for success by striving for something that is within reach. Now, someone could say, well, but what about being ambitious? Ambition simply means a series of attainable goals. You see, ambition is the journey of attainable goals. So you start, so you have something that's really out there that you want to achieve, but you do it by having attainable short-term goals which build into the long-term, large-scale, vision. Okay, so that's one factor, because you have to ask ourselves when we fail and it becomes like a repeated cycle, then we have to ask ourselves, why is it always happening like that? Right? What is this teaching me about the things that I'm striving for? One thing that I always advise people to do is allow other people who you trust to give you feedback on the things that you're trying to achieve, right? Get another pair of eyes on your plan, right? This is what I think I should be going for. But look, I'm going to empower you. I trust you. I know you're my well-wisher and you're intelligent. Tell me the honest truth. What do you think about the things that I'm trying to go for? What do you think about my timeline, right? Get another honest pair of eyes on that, so it's informed, so they can look, right, okay, so you've not been going to the gym ever. You eat a really unhealthy diet and you want to become a world-class gold medal gymnast within the next 6 months. Really? Dude, really? So that kind of, okay, I think we need to rearrange or refocus. So we shouldn't get so much knocked down if the goals are more realistic, while in parallel, so I'm going for something, enjoy the journey. I was listening to something this morning on this, which was very interesting. And what was suggested is that when you set your goals, you set your goal, but you also set the journey. The goal is also the journey to the goal. So I want to achieve X, Y, and Z. You could also write down, and I want to grow, be inspired, and be motivated while I'm moving in that direction. Very powerful. Why? Because then you're no longer fixated on the outcome. You're also experiencing the growth on the journey to the outcome, which brings us closer to what Krishna tells Arjuna. He says to Arjuna, don't worry so much about the result, but I want you to make the endeavor. What happens in the Bhakti Yoga tradition is if the endeavor and the goal aligns nicely with the kind of person you are, you'll find it's easy to become detached from the outcome, because if you've chosen the right goals, you tend to enjoy the journey. You see, it's very powerful. Krishna's system is very efficient. It ticks many boxes simultaneously. So if your goal is aligned with your nature, your kind of character, you'll enjoy the journey, and whatever the outcome is, you'll still be happy. You'll feel a sense of energy, enthusiasm, motivation just by moving in that direction.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. I think two of the very powerful ideas that you shared now is firstly that when we fail to achieve a goal, we must not make the conclusion that there's something wrong with us, but we should, reflect and see that maybe that the goal was unrealistic, or maybe our process of trying to attain the goal, wasn't sufficient. And then we can, reevaluate and maybe adjust our goals. And the other thing that really struck me was, this idea that
you are on mute, Sharadia. Okay, well, while she's coming back on, I'll just add, you can think of your endeavor as like an experiment. So you can think of it that, let's try an experiment. Let's see how we do in terms of moving this forward. So you're not invested in the outcome, meaning that the outcome doesn't define you, but it's something you're trying. And because if we frame it as an experiment, it's something you can continually learn from, refine, and improve. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Sharadia.
No, sorry, but I just lost connection there for a moment, but I'm back. So the other powerful idea that I thought is that we should also value something about the process. And, the analogy that you gave, someone might have the ambition or the goal to be a gymnast, and that might be unrealistic. But in that process, you could, for instance, value that you will learn self-discipline, and you'll maybe improve your routine. So I think that is also something really valuable for us to learn. Now, we still have a couple of questions. We can see how far we get. Now, one question that we have is more about a person's specific situation. So I think without knowing more details, it might be difficult to give a specific answer, but you might be able to give them some principles which might help them to know how to deal with this. So the person is saying that they're in a work situation where they feel that the work or the job that they have is maybe not ideally suited to their nature. And it's also a situation in which they feel that although they can, to some extent, do the job in the mode of goodness, the hours that they're required to work is really long and taxing, in terms of the shifts, and also in terms of, many days that they need to work after each other. So the person is asking how to deal with the situation, because they're also saying that if they would just quit the job, it could create difficulty, for other people. So I don't know if you can help us provide some principles that can help the person to know how to deal with this challenge.
Fantastic, thank you. So this is where we have to see what we can do within the constraints that we have. We have to be very realistic. And this is a principle for life, So there's the ideal and there's the real. So it's, to what extent can we bring some of these elements in based upon the situation that we're in? And that is different for different people. We have to just be very honest. We have different karma, we have different opportunities, different experiences. The rule of thumb is to explore what your options are, and then to do the very best you can within the possibilities that one has. Okay, so that's the point. And let me explain what I mean by explore options. There are two categories of options. Okay, one category of options is what we can change externally. Okay, so maybe I can change the hours, I can negotiate the hours. Maybe I can try have a different job that I can go into. Those are external category, external options. The other set of options are internal, right? So maybe I can be more tolerant of the situation. Maybe there's ways that I can look at my job differently, so it's more interesting, more a learning experience. You see, so you have to see within both categories what can be done, and be realistic, especially when others are depending on us as well. So that's where we have to be conscious of that, right? So we have the understanding that we have, and then we have certain constraints that the world may place upon us. And sometimes we can work through those constraints over a longer period of time. But the rule of thumb is be realistic, first of all. And this is also where another pair of eyes comes in, because I may look and think, I can't do anything. But it's sometimes amazing when you ask other people, this is what I'm stuck with. What do you think I could do? Right? I've brainstormed what I think are some options. Other people may look and think, you know what, I actually think you could do this or this, or I don't think it's actually that bad. I think your boss is reasonable. Maybe you could speak to him or her and suggest this. So you have to, first of all, try to be cognizant of what are the genuine options, both internally and externally. And then of the internal and external options, what are some of the things that I could try? Maybe I could try this, because there's usually a hierarchy of options, right? So you have 10 options. Okay, maybe I could try this first, right? This is the best thing I could try first. If this doesn't work, I could go to option 2. If this doesn't work, I can go to option 3. So it's not black and white. There's usually a few different things we can try. And what I've seen done effectively is often people do multiple options, meaning they'll try some things externally and they'll try some things internally at the same time. So I'm going to try and become more tolerant, and I'm going to try and learn everything I can from the environment that I'm in, right? And while I'm doing that, I'm also going to speak to the manager and say, can I change my hours? Or I'd like to think about career progression. I'm okay doing this for now, but I'd like to work my way over into this role within a year's time. Okay, so you have to look at it quite broadly on a case-by-case basis, but these are some rule of thumbs. So do the best I can in the current situation, look at possibilities that I can generate, speak to other people to see what possibilities they could also perceive in my situation, and then try different options, starting with what's the most viable first option, what's the second best option, and start to tick those things off the list and see what doors open on that basis.
Thank you, Prabhu. I think that was a very practical and encouraging answer. And I really appreciated that you highlighted the fact that we always have options. I think we sometimes, might feel that we're kind of just stuck in a place. But I know even in our scripture Bhagavatam, it says between destiny and endeavor, endeavor is supreme. Mm-hmm. So it was a very helpful answer. And what I also really valued was that, again, you stressed the need for us to have inputs from others, which you stressed kind of throughout this whole workshop, having friends that can really advise, also probably having mentors that can give us, an outside perspective. And I think that is something that we should all really take shelter of. Yes, Prabhu.
I want to add one last bit, just very quickly. And that sometimes if we can't do certain things in our job, then we can still offset that by what we do in our free time. Okay, let's be very real. We want to be very real. Look, the world's in recession right now because of coronavirus and so many other things. Jobs may not be that easy to come by. We may not be as able to be selective as we were in the past in some cases. So just keeping that very real lens. And sometimes it's about thinking long term, that I want to get into another situation, but I have to build that journey over a period of time. Sorry, that was just wanted to add.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. So we still have more questions, but I'm conscious that we are running out of time. So I wanted to just ask you two things. There's one question which is not exactly related to goal setting. It's more about relationships and boundaries. So I wanted to ask you, can I ask you that question if you've got time to answer it briefly? And then if you want to say any concluding words.
Okay, yes, please feel free to ask the question.
Okay, so the question that the person is asking is that they're saying that if you experience that, people in your friend circle are very jealous and even vindictive towards you, and you have tried to distance yourself from them, but they keep on coming into your life and talking about you badly, etc., how can you deal with that?
It's an interesting question. So they're jealous, you try to distance yourself, they keep coming into your life. I have to say, there's a question mark about this idea of keep coming into your life, because someone can't force themselves into your life. What it means is that there may be certain environments where you both associate or spend time. Okay, so that's one thing. Now, there's two different things that come to mind initially, and this is actually something my spiritual mentor spoke about. Sometimes you can actually get people to be in a space whereby either they come up to a certain level or they'll leave you alone. In other words, if you raise the level of your discussion, the level of your dealing, then what happens is it will make people who want to stay at a lower level, they'll feel uncomfortable, because it's just like you're not gossiping like they used to. You're not criticizing other people like they used to. When they do it, you kind of just tune out. Then they'll start to feel uncomfortable. Either they have to come up or they'll leave you alone. That's one factor. And this is something that people are uncomfortable with, but some people are comfortable. And I know people who are comfortable having this conversation. Sometimes people have the conversation and say, guys, look, to be honest with you, it's just not working. What you're into, what I'm into, we're just very different people, and I'm finding that this is what's going on, etc., etc. Or I'm hearing that this is being said. To be honest, it's not working for me. So look, if you want the relationship to last, we need to rethink how we're able to associate. I was doing some temping work many years ago when I was, I think, student days, and I was working for one organization. It was a charity. And we had like a week where we were just doing like we were sharing different self-help ideas and seminars. And I never forget, there was one Christian lady, very nice lady actually. And she gave a presentation and she talked about how she met an old school friend. They hadn't seen each other for years. And they bumped into each other and they exchanged numbers and said, all right, let's go to dinner. They went to dinner and they were having a conversation. But this lady, she was very honest. At the end of the dinner, she said to this other person, said, look, we've had a wonderful evening, but I've seen through our discussion that we just don't really have anything in common, So, respectfully, I'm not going to stay in touch, and I'm not expecting you to either. But, if you see me around or I see you around, feel free to just say hello and we'll do the same. And I'll be honest, I always remember that statement, and she meant it, by the way. She was like that, but in a very nice way. She's just very respectful. But what it was is that she was very respectful of herself, you see? And I thought that was a great example of someone who has very healthy self-respect. They're not being harsh to other people, but they're not being harsh to themselves either. They're very respectful of themselves, their time, their interests, and what they want to do with their life. And so she was just like, look, I really value you. I can see that you and I, we don't really have much in common. That's not a criticism of you at all. We're just very different people. So honestly, I'm not going to stay in touch with you, but if you see me around, I see you around, we can always be very respectful and say hello. And I thought that was so mature. I'll be honest, it really left an impression, because what would life be like if we were that honest with each other? I understand what you're into. I'm into something very different, but look, that's fine. We we're all individuals. We can have different interests. I'm not expecting you to I'm not expecting you to have to spend time with me on things that you don't find interesting, and I'm not going to spend time with you on things that I don't find very stimulating. But I respect your journey. I respect your path. I honor you as a person, and I wish you well on your own journey of growth. Could you imagine what life would be like if people were that mature and that honest? So you may also, depending on who it is and how comfortable you are, you may need to have that conversation, because I'll be honest, the thing is, incidents that happen to us in our lives are not an accident. Sometimes Krishna will pull us in situations because he wants you to develop a certain quality. You don't want to be assertive, but he knows that for your growth, you need to learn to be assertive. So you run away and Krishna allows them to run after you until you come to the point of realizing, wherever I go, these dudes just keep chasing me. What's going on? Okay, I need to start having honest but respectful, always respectful, honest but respectful conversations, and say, look, I value you as a person, but you know what? This doesn't work. I do want to be around people, but this, and you can own it. I'm not comfortable being around people who are critical, right? It's not that you're a bad person, you're like this. No, own it. Look, I understand that, this may be what works for you. It's just me. I have to own it. For me, it doesn't work. It's not a put down of you. I'm not criticizing you, but it doesn't work for me. So so respect. I understand if this is what you need to do. You know, I'm not here to control you or tell you what to do, but it won't work for me. You know. So that being the case, maybe it's just we need to go our own way and, you know, and go on our own journey. And then and you'd be surprised how many people will change when they hear that, right? Because deep down, if they're critical unnecessarily, they will know that's not healthy. And it takes just one person who's got enough strength of character to say, look, it's not working for me. I understand that it may work for you. It's not for me. So, you know, and then you'll see things can change. But it's always asking ourselves the question, what is life? Why is it this keeps happening to me? Because sometimes life is trying to teach us a lesson that we don't want to learn, to be honest. Sometimes I don't want to be that person, but life's like, no. But for your growth, you need to be that person. So I think the real question is, what is the lesson that I'm meant to be learning? What is the way that I'm meant to be responding? And when we do that, then things really grow.
Thank you so much, Ruba. I think that was a very useful and practical answer. And what I really took from that is that we need enough respect for ourselves so that we can communicate our needs and our boundaries. But at the same time, we need enough respect for others so that we can do that in a way that is kind and caring and compassionate. And I do think that having those difficult conversations might be very challenging in the moment, but it seems that our life will just become so much easier if we can build up the courage to have those difficult conversations.
And there's a science of how to become that person, by the way. So Charity is aware we have a podcast called this, and it's called the Edanova podcast. And the first one we did was called the Self-Esteem Spectrum, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about self-esteem. People in the name of self-esteem are like trying to push people around, and they're just kind of being, I'm better than everyone else. That's not self-esteem, that's a superiority complex. Then you've got other people who go in the opposite direction and they feel inferior to others. But real self-esteem is, interestingly enough, it's the same thing that Krishna talks about in the Gita, samadarshana, equal vision. That equal vision, most people think equal vision means I see others with equal vision. Equal vision actually means you see yourself with the same vision with which you see other people. The equal vision includes you, right? In other words, you see yourself equally inherently valuable and appreciated by Krishna because you're all part and parcel of the Supreme. That's real self-esteem. Anyway, we have a whole podcast on that. So it's on Apple and other platforms. If you have some time and if you're interested, please do check that out. It's called the Self-Esteem Spectrum, and it's the Ed Anoba podcast. I'll put my name in the chat window just so you can look it up as well if you're interested.